long before cities hummed with light, there were only stars and stories. Around fires that cracked and whispered beneath the night, people spoke of things that watched from the dark. Shapes in forests, ripples in the deep, wings that passed across the moon. Every land had its shadows, and every shadow had a name. These weren't merely monsters. They were reflections of wonder, of fear, of how small we once felt beneath an endless sky. Tonight, as the world around you quiets, we'll follow those ancient echoes through mist and myth, through time and across continents to meet the creatures that have lived not in cages, but in our collective dream, the cryptids. Welcome back to Snore and Lore. Tonight, we drift through centuries of whispered sightings and half-forgotten tales, the history of beings said to walk, swim or fly just beyond the reach of certainty. This 2-hour story is designed to help you unwind, to calm the mind as curiosity takes gentle shape. Find a comfortable place to rest. Let your breathing slow. Perhaps you hear the faint sound of wind outside your window, or the soft hum of a night that has settled into stillness. In the quiet between thoughts, imagine a map, vast and faded, edges curled with age. Across it are drawn thousands of stories. The ink of myth bleeds into the parchment of history, and somewhere between the two, cryptids dwell. From the towering forests of the Pacific Northwest to the still waters of a Scottish loch, from the frost of the Himalayas to the red sands of Australia, we'll wander gently, guided not by proof, but by the timeless human wish to believe that mystery still exists. So close your eyes, let the sound of this voice anchor you, and as sleep begins to fold softly around you, we begin our journey where trees whisper and legends breathe. Deep in the rain-soaked forests of the Pacific Northwest, where mist lingers between towering pines and dawn arrives shyly through the fog, there are stories older than memory itself. They tell of a presence tall, silent and unseen, whose footprints vanish before the eyes can trace them. The people here call it Sasquatch, others call it Bigfoot, but in every version it is the same idea, something wild that never left the old world behind. The Pacific Northwest is a place of stillness and enormity. The air smells of cedar and wet soil. The trees rise like columns in a green cathedral, and when rain falls, as it often does, it turns sound into something soft and distant. For centuries, people have said that in these forests lives a being that walks upright, human-like, but not quite human. Long before the name Bigfoot appeared in newspapers or documentaries, the First Nations of the region told stories of hairy forest giants. Among the Salish people, they were known as Sasquatch, a guardian of the woods, neither holy spirit nor beast. To the Lumi, there were tales of Tsemekwes, a shadowy being whose calls echoed across valleys in the early light. These stories weren't told to frighten. They were warnings and reminders that humans were not the first to walk these woods, and perhaps not the only ones still doing so. When European settlers arrived in the 1800s, they began to hear the same whispers. Miners, trappers and loggers spoke of strange cries in the night. They found enormous footprints impressed in mud along riverbanks, 18 inches long, 5 inches wide. Some said they saw the creature at the edge of their campfires, stepping back into the trees with the silence of smoke. The legend began to take modern shape in 1958, when a construction crew near Bluff Creek, California, discovered a trail of massive footprints around their work site. A journalist published the story under the headline Bigfoot, and the name stayed. It was the perfect word, simple, vivid, impossible to forget. For many, it was entertainment, a campfire curiosity, but for others, it was an awakening. Soon, amateur researchers called Bigfoot hunters began to collect evidence. Grainy photographs, shaky film reels, and plaster casts of prints were catalogued and studied. The most famous, the Patterson-Gimlin film of 1967, showed a tall, Appel-like figure striding through a sunlit clearing. The image is burned into folklore, a few seconds of motion that have inspired decades of debate. Was it a hoax, a misidentification, or proof that something ancient still roamed the forest? Scientists, for the most part, dismissed the idea. No bones, no hair samples, no DNA had ever confirmed the creature's existence, but the mystery refused to fade. Year after year, hikers and campers reported eerie howls at night, or glimpses of movement just beyond the tree line. Hunters told of finding deer carcasses torn apart with strength beyond human measure. Others spoke of a strange odour, a mix of musk and earth, lingering after something unseen had passed. Yet the heart of the legend lies not in evidence, but in emotion. Bigfoot represents a longing for wilderness untouched by modern hands, for a world still holding secrets. He stands as a symbol of the boundary between civilization and the untamed, a living echo of what humans once were. Anthropologists have noted that nearly every culture has its own version of this wild, hairy man of the woods. In Asia there is the Yeti, in Australia the Yowie, in the Himalayas stories of the Meteor. The pattern seems universal, a shared imagination that spans continents and centuries. Perhaps it is something older than language itself, a memory of when humans lived closer to nature, when the line between man and beast was not yet sharp. Modern investigations continue. Teams venture into forests with night vision cameras, motion sensors and audio recorders. They leave fruit as bait. They collect casts of fresh prints and analyze strange sounds. Some believe the creature could be a relict population of Gigantopithecus, a giant ape once thought extinct for hundreds of thousands of years. Others think it could be an undiscovered primate species, intelligent and elusive. Skeptics argue that in the age of satellites and smartphones, something that large could not remain hidden. And yet, the forests of the Pacific Northwest are vast, millions of acres of wilderness where few humans ever walk. It is possible, they say, that silence itself has become Bigfoot's best camouflage. Over time, Bigfoot has become both folklore and industry. There are festivals, roadside museums, television specials. In small mountain towns, carved wooden silhouettes guard the entrances of diners and souvenir shops. But behind the humour, behind the t-shirts and coffee mugs, there remains a quiet reverence, the feeling that these woods are still alive with unseen things. Even scientists admit that mystery has value. The idea of Bigfoot, real or not, keeps curiosity alive. It invites us to look deeper into nature, to imagine that discovery has not ended, that somewhere in a fog-drenched valley, a shape might move just out of sight. As the night deepens, imagine the forest now. The rain has stopped. Mist drifts low between the trunks. Somewhere far away, an owl calls once, then falls silent. In that hush, the story of Bigfoot continues, not in proof, but in possibility. Perhaps in the end, the mystery was never meant to be solved, only remembered. The forest breathes. At night, the Pacific Northwest becomes a sea of silhouettes. Every trunk, every fern, every ripple of wind, a brushstroke in an ancient painting. The air grows cool, and the world folds into a deep green hush. It's in this quiet that most encounters are said to happen. A man walking a forgotten logging trail might stop, noticing how suddenly the birds have gone still. A hunter might feel watched, though he sees nothing. A camper might wake to the crunch of something heavy outside the tent, steady, deliberate, unhurried. And when morning comes, only wide, human-like tracks remain, pressed deep into the mud, already filling with rainwater. The people who tell these stories often sound surprised by their own words. They aren't adventurers or thrill-seekers. They're locals. Rangers, fishermen, truckers, hikers. They describe not fear, but awe. One said the forest felt aware, as if something vast and ancient moved within it, unseen but unmistakably present. For many, these experiences were transformative. Some quit hunting altogether, no longer able to aim a rifle into trees that might hide a thinking creature. Others began keeping journals, sketching tracks, collecting samples. The phenomenon of citizen researchers, ordinary people dedicating weekends to searching for signs of Bigfoot, became part of the culture. In small towns across Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, community meetings were held where people shared encounters as calmly as others might discuss weather. The stories varied in detail but shared a pattern. A height of 7 to 9 feet, shoulders broader than a man's torso, hair dark brown or auburn, sometimes grey, eyes that glowed amber when caught by flashlight. A walk that was neither human nor animal, something in between, purposeful and smooth. And always the same lingering sense of having glimpsed something that didn't belong to this age. One account from 1924, told by a group of miners near Mount St. Helens, became famous among believers. They claimed that after seeing large creatures watching them from the ridge, their cabin was attacked in the night. Rocks hurled, walls struck by heavy blows. When they escaped the next morning, they found giant footprints all around. Newspapers called it the Ape Canyon Incident. To skeptics, it was hysteria. To believers, it was proof. And to storytellers, it became legend. But legends grow, as all stories do. In the 1970s and 80s, Bigfoot took on new shapes, sometimes a gentle giant protecting the forest, sometimes a shy remnant of prehistoric man. In the Pacific Northwest, families told their children that Bigfoot was a guardian, watching over lost hikers and animals. Others saw him as an omen. To see him was to be reminded of humility, that humans were not masters of all things. For native peoples, these meanings had long existed. Among the Chinook, Bigfoot was Skookum, a wild being who represented the untamed spirit of nature. Among the Quileutwi, who lived near the coast, similar beings were believed to live in harmony with the forest, keeping balance. To mock or chase them was to invite misfortune. These teachings turned myth into moral: respect the unseen, and it will respect you. As modern culture absorbed the legend, it evolved again. Documentaries played late at night, showing maps dotted with sightings. Authors collected testimonies and built archives. Radio shows devoted entire hours to the mystery. Each retelling blurred the line between folklore and reality a little more. Some researchers suggested that Bigfoot might not be a physical being at all, but something between worlds, a spirit or a creature existing just outside perception. They noted how footprints would start and stop abruptly, as if vanishing mid-step. Others drew connections between Bigfoot and ancient myths of forest spirits or wild men found in Europe and Asia. The idea that such archetypes appear everywhere, from the Orang Pendek in Sumatra to the Almasti in the Caucasus, hinted at something deeply human. Maybe Bigfoot was not a creature we discovered, but one we remembered. The forests themselves contribute to the legend. Fog hangs heavy, distorting sound. A snapping branch can echo strangely. A shadow can seem to move when only the wind stirs leaves. At twilight, when the last light filters through rain, shapes take on their own intentions. In those moments, the mind paints what it most expects or fears to see. And yet, even with all that said, there are prints, hundreds of them, cast and catalogued, studied under magnifying lenses. Many are proven hoaxes, carved wooden feet pressed into mud, but some remain baffling. Dermal ridges, like fingerprints, visible in the plaster, weight distribution that suggests enormous mass, but fluid motion. Impressions too deep for human pranksters. In 1982, anthropologist Dr. Grover Krantz famously defended the possibility that some tracks were genuine, suggesting an undiscovered primate could explain them. His colleagues laughed, but he persisted. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, he said, but the evidence will never be found if no one looks. Years passed. Expeditions continued. Technology improved. Thermal imaging, drones, DNA analysis. Still, no bones, no body, only the echo of the search itself. And perhaps that's what keeps the story alive. Not the creature, but the chase. Because Bigfoot, in many ways, is a mirror. He stands for the things we've lost: wildness, mystery, the humility of not knowing. He is the untouched forest in a world of highways. The silence that follows when the machines stop. He reminds us that not everything must be explained, that wonder can exist for its own sake. Imagine now standing in that forest again. The ground soft beneath your feet. The smell of pine and earth. A gentle drizzle collecting on leaves, dripping like distant footsteps. You hear the wind shift. A low sound, almost like a sigh. You turn, but there is only mist, and the feeling of being seen by something patient and old. Maybe it was only imagination. Maybe not. Either way, the forest keeps its secrets, as it always has. And somewhere between myth and truth, between what we believe and what we can't quite dismiss, Bigfoot continues to walk, not just through the woods, but through the corridors of our collective mind. He moves slowly, fading into the sound of rain, into the hush of the trees, and when he is gone, the forest is exactly as it was, still, infinite, waiting. From these misty mountains and endless evergreens, our path now follows the sound of water, across oceans and through time, to another legend, one that sleeps beneath the surface of a dark and quiet lake. The waters of Loch Ness lie still beneath a sky the colour of slate. Mist clings to the hills, and the air hums with that quiet kind of mystery only found before dawn. Somewhere beneath the surface the darkness stirs, a shape that has haunted the imagination for nearly a century. Locals call her Nessie. To others she is the Loch Ness monster, but to Scotland she is something deeper, a mirror of the loch itself, vast, ancient, and forever keeping her secrets beneath the calm. The Scottish Highlands have always felt close to myth. The landscape itself seems half-dreamed, mountains rising like sleeping giants, their peaks lost to fog, valleys echoing with the sound of unseen rivers, and the lochs deep and dark holding time in their depths. Loch Ness, the largest and most famous of them all, stretches for more than 20 miles. A long ribbon of water carved by glaciers 10,000 years ago. It is a place where silence feels alive. To gaze upon it at dusk is to understand why stories thrive here. The surface appears smooth, but the loss is more than 700 feet deep, darker than the sea, colder than imagination. When wind sweeps across it, ripples form patterns that look almost deliberate, as if something just beneath has stirred and vanished again. The earliest known story of a creature in these waters dates back to the 6th century. A monk named Saint Columba, travelling through the Highlands, was said to have encountered a water beast in the river Ness. According to the life of Saint Columba, written a century later, the monster attacked a swimmer, and Columba commanded it in the name of God to retreat, which it did. The legend lingered, long after monks and saints faded from the shorelines. But Nessie as we know her, the long-necked serpentine creature that captured the world's imagination, surfaced much later, in the spring of 1933. That year a new road opened along the loch's northern edge, offering drivers a clear view of the water. Soon, reports began to appear in newspapers. A local couple claimed to have seen a great creature rolling and plunging on the surface like a whale. Others followed, fishermen, tourists, even police officers describing humps rising from the loch before slipping silently below. The story spread quickly, from Inverness to London, and then across the Atlantic. The Daily Mail sent a team to investigate, including a hunter named Marmaduke Wetherill. Within days he reported enormous footprints near the shore. But when casts of those prints reached London's Natural History Museum, they were identified as hoaxes, the imprints of a hippopotamus foot, likely part of an umbrella stand or a prank souvenir. The scandal embarrassed the Mail, but by then, Nessie had already swum into legend. A year later, in 1934, came the photograph that would define the myth, the so-called surgeon's photograph. It showed a dark, curved neck and small head rising from the water, elegant and prehistoric. For decades it was considered evidence, the image of a living plesiosaur hiding in Scotland's murky depths. Only in 1994 did it finally emerge that the photo had been staged using a toy submarine and a carved head. Yet, even after the hoax was exposed, belief didn't fade. If anything, it deepened because the photo had already become something larger than proof. It had become myth made visible. Through the following decades, Loch Ness became a magnet for dreamers and scientists alike. Expeditions arrived with sonar equipment, underwater cameras, and submersibles. In 1960, a grainy film by aeronautical engineer Tim Dinsdale showed a moving shape on the surface, producing a wake that rippled across the loch. Many experts dismissed it, but others, including submarine specialists, called it unexplainable. Sonar readings followed in the 1970s and 1980s. Some showed large, moving objects deep in the water, far below the range of known fish. Others found nothing at all. Each attempt to solve the mystery seemed only to reinforce it. The loch remained silent, the surface unbroken, the secret intact. There's a kind of poetry to that, the way mystery resists measurement. For every skeptic who insists that Nessie is a log, a wave, or a school of fish, there is someone else who stands quietly on the shore and feels, if only for a moment, that the impossible might still be possible. Part of Nessie's endurance lies in her setting. Loch Ness, with its steep cliffs and shadowed waters, seems designed for secrets. It's said that the loch never freezes, that it is too deep, too restless. Its water is thick with peat, turning it a deep black even in daylight. If anything large were to live beneath, light would never touch it. The mind fills that darkness with shape, the curve of a neck, the ripple of something vast passing below. Many theories have surfaced. Some suggest Nessie could be a surviving plesiosaur, trapped since the age of dinosaurs. Others propose it's a giant eel, a misidentified sturgeon, or even a group of seals that wander in from the sea. And then there are those who say Nessie is not an animal at all, but a spirit of the Loch, an embodiment of the place itself, born from centuries of Scottish folklore that speaks of kelpies, the shape-shifting water horses, said to lure travellers beneath the surface. In that sense, Nessie may not be a creature that lives in the Loch, but a legend that is the Loch. The fascination became cultural. In the 1950s, hotels and gift shops sprang up along the water. Tour boats began offering monster-watching cruises. The small town of Drumnadrochit became the unofficial home of Nessie lore, with museums dedicated to sightings and scientific investigations. Pilgrims of curiosity still visit today, scanning the water through binoculars, holding cameras steady just in case the surface breaks. Yet, beyond tourism and tabloids, Nessie has always represented something quieter, a connection between wonder and place. The people who live by the Loch don't always claim to believe, but they respect the story. For them, Nessie is part of the landscape, a familiar mystery woven into daily life. Fishermen say good morning to the water before casting their lines. Children grow up hearing bedtime tales of the monster beneath their windows. It is myth as neighbour. Modern research continues. In 2019, scientists conducted the most comprehensive DNA survey of Loch Ness ever attempted. They found no evidence of ancient reptiles, but they did find high concentrations of eel DNA, renewing theories that Nessie could be a massive unknown species of eel. The discovery didn't end the legend, it only shifted its shape, as all legends do. And maybe that's the point. The Loch Ness monster isn't just about whether something hides beneath the waves, it's about why we want something too. Nessie endures because she gives form to the human need for wonder, for something that refuses to be explained, that exists in the quiet between myth and memory. Imagine standing there now, on the stone shore as twilight deepens. The wind carries the scent of rain. The water laps softly, and across the loch a single light flickers in a cottage window. For a moment the surface shivers, just once, like a breath breaking from the deep, and then smooths again, leaving only ripples that fade into stillness. Perhaps it was the wind, or perhaps for a heartbeat the past had surfaced, reminding us that mystery still belongs to the night. The loch at night is not entirely silent. There is the faint sound of lapping water against the stones, the soft whir of wind moving through heather, the occasional cry of a distant bird carried across the dark expanse. But beneath all of it, there's something else. A hum, deep and constant, the sound of depth itself. Loch Ness is so vast, so dark, that it almost feels alive. The deeper you look, the more it seems to look back. Those who have lived near its shores often speak of the feeling. It's not fear, exactly. More like awareness, a presence that belongs to the place, woven into the air as much as the water. Long before cameras and newspapers, Highlanders spoke of water spirits called Ichquitsei, or water horses, that could appear as beautiful creatures to lure the unwary into the loch. The tales warned travellers never to mount a strange horse near the water's edge, for once astride it, they would be dragged below, never to surface again. These were not merely fairy stories. They were reflections of the loch's power, reminders of respect for a landscape that could both sustain and swallow. In time, the kelpies and water horses blurred with the image of Nessie herself. The old myths became modern folklore, their essence unchanged, that something ancient, something beyond reason, moves in the deep. Even now, when technology can scan the ocean floor, the loch remains partly unknowable. Its water, stained dark by peat and shadow, absorbs light almost completely. A diver once described it as descending into black velvet. Below 60 feet, sight vanishes entirely. A torch beam fades after a few meters. The loch's bed is irregular, full of ridges, hidden channels, and layers of cold, unmoving water. Scientists call these thermal layers thermoclines. To the human imagination, they are thresholds, the kind of boundaries where myths are born. Over the decades, hundreds of people have reported seeing something. Some describe humps undulating like the back of a great serpent. Others see a sleek grey body gliding just beneath the surface. Sometimes there are only ripples forming imperfect circles as though something large had turned below. The descriptions vary, but the emotional core is the same. Awe, disbelief, the sensation of witnessing something vast and impossible. In 1954, a fishing boat equipped with sonar recorded a large moving object deep under the vessel. It followed their boat for several minutes before fading from the screen. The crew, hardened men used to the Loch's tricks, stood quietly afterward, unsure of what they had encountered. "We saw it," one later said, "but we still don't understand it." Other sonar scans over the years captured strange results, shapes too big for known fish, rising slowly from the depths before slipping away. One sonar engineer once described seeing what appeared to be a long living form, nearly 30 feet in length, moving gracefully in the water. No one could replicate the reading, and soon it joined the long list of beautiful uncertainties that define the legend. In the 1970s, the Academy of Applied Science in Boston conducted a famous expedition. They lowered cameras into the Loch, guided by sonar. One image that came back showed a large flipper-like shape. The photograph was blurry, distorted by silt and light, but to believers it was enough, a glimpse of the monster herself. To skeptics it was only shadow and suggestion. And perhaps that is the true nature of Loch Ness, a place where shadow and suggestion are indistinguishable from truth. It's easy to forget that myths need very little to thrive. Just a hint of movement, a sound, a reflection, and the mind does the rest. But what's remarkable about Nessie's story is how it has endured even as science has surrounded it, trying again and again to explain it away. Every few years a new expedition sets out, armed with the latest instruments. Drones fly over the water, submarines glide below, yet each discovery, each explanation, seems to fall short. The mystery reshapes itself, staying one step ahead of the tools that chase it. For the people of the Highlands, this is fitting. The Loch is not meant to be solved, it is meant to be felt. To stand on its banks is to sense history layered like mist, Picts carving symbols into stone, monks crossing the valley with candles, fishermen hearing the splash of something large, unseen, moving beneath their boats. One old man interviewed in the 1980s summed it up best. He said, "I've lived here all my life and I've never seen her, but I believe she's there, because when I look at that water, I know something's looking back. And isn't that belief itself the point? Whether Nessie is flesh and bone, spirit and story, or only the reflection of our longing for wonder, she exists in hearts, in headlines, in the quiet ripples that move through time. She connects us to that fragile part of being human that still hopes to find magic in the world." The Loch Ness monster reminds us that not all mysteries are meant for answers. Some exist so that wonder can remain alive, breathing softly through the generations, never surfacing completely. So tonight, if your mind drifts toward the sound of water, imagine standing on that pebbled shore. The loch stretches before you, still as glass. A cloud passes over the moon, and the world dims. For a moment the surface quivers, just enough to catch the light, just enough to make you wonder, and then the ripples fade, as though the water has smiled and gone back to sleep. And in that stillness, you understand. Loch Ness doesn't need proof to be real. Its reality lives in the quiet between belief and peace. As dawn breaks faintly over the highlands and the mists begin to lift, our journey carries on from cold water to cold wind, from the dark of a loch to the shadows of a small American town, where another legend unfolded beneath a flickering red sky. In the quiet hills of West Virginia, where rivers twist through coal country and fog gathers thick along the trees, there are nights when silence feels alive. It was here, beneath the yellow glow of street lamps and the rusting girders of an old bridge, that people began to see it, a creature with wings like a shroud, and eyes that burned red in the dark. They called it Mothman. To some, it was a warning, to others a vision, but in every whisper it was a mystery that refused to fade, one that turned an ordinary town into one of the strangest legends of modern America. The story of Mothman begins in Point Pleasant, a small riverside town where the Ohio and Kanawha rivers meet. In the 1960s, it was a place of quiet rhythm, church bells on Sundays, coal trains at dawn, the scent of rain on old brick streets. Life moved slowly there, until one cold night in November 1966, when something changed. Two young couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Mallet, were driving near a remote area known as the TNT plant, an abandoned World War II munitions site filled with long concrete bunkers overgrown with vines. The night was still when their headlights caught something ahead on the road, two glowing red orbs suspended above the ground. Then it moved. They saw a figure, tall, grey, with wings folded behind its back. Its eyes glowed like embers. Terrified, they sped away, the creature following, flying effortlessly even at highway speeds. When they reached town, pale and trembling, they reported what they'd seen to the local sheriff. Their story made the morning paper, and from that moment, Point Pleasant was never the same. Over the next 13 months, dozens of sightings were reported. Men and women claimed to see a winged figure perched on rooftops, gliding above trees, or standing silently by the road before vanishing into the night. Some said its wings stretched 12 feet across. Others said it emitted a strange humming sound, low and resonant, that filled the air like distant machinery. The creature became known as Mothman, a name borrowed from comic books, but the story felt nothing like fiction. Reporters descended on Point Pleasant, their headlines a mix of skepticism and fear. Researchers came too, some from universities, others from the fringes of paranormal study, all drawn by the possibility that something extraordinary was happening in this quiet Appalachian town. Witnesses often described a feeling that accompanied the sightings, a deep sense of dread, as though the creature's presence carried meaning beyond what eyes could see. Dogs went missing, radios malfunctioned. Some locals claimed they saw strange lights in the sky, red orbs moving in deliberate patterns or beams that cut through clouds. It was as if Point Pleasant had become a focal point of the uncanny, a crossroads between the ordinary and the inexplicable. Among those drawn into the mystery was journalist and researcher John Keel, who would later write the Mothman Prophecies. He arrived in 1966 and began interviewing witnesses, noting that many described phone interference, prophetic dreams, and encounters with mysterious strangers who seemed to know too much. Keel began to suspect that Mothman was more than a creature, that it was part of a broader pattern of phenomena linking UFOs, psychic events, and government secrecy. Skeptics offered simpler explanations. Some said the creature was just a sandhill crane, large, red-eyed, and capable of strange cries that might startle those unfamiliar with it. Others proposed it was a barred owl, magnified by darkness and fear. But these explanations struggled to account for the consistency of the reports, or the collective unease that settled over Point Pleasant. The legend reached its tragic climax on December 15, 1967. That evening, the Silver Bridge, a vital link between Point Pleasant and Ohio, collapsed during rush hour. 46 people lost their lives as cars plunged into the icy river below. It was one of the worst bridge disasters in American history. In the aftermath, many recalled that Mothman sightings had peaked just before the tragedy, and none were reported afterward. To those who believed, the creature had not been a monster, but a messenger, a harbinger of doom, appearing to warn of the impending collapse. To others, it was coincidence, the mind's way of weaving meaning through grief. Over time, the Mothman legend grew into something gentler, more reflective. Point Pleasant, once shadowed by fear, began to embrace its mystery. A statue of the creature now stands in the town square, silver, winged, eyes red like rubies. Each September, the Mothman Festival draws thousands of visitors who celebrate the story not as terror, but as folklore. Children pose for photos, vendors sell t-shirts, and laughter fills the streets where fear once lived. But when night falls and the crowds disperse, the river flows as it always has, slow, dark, and ancient. Locals say that on certain foggy nights, if you stand by the old bridge site and listen carefully, you might hear the faint rustle of wings overhead. No menace, no message, just the soft reminder that mystery still lingers even when the world seems mapped and measured. Psychologists who've studied the Mothman phenomenon often point out that legends like this emerge in times of social stress. The 1960s were an age of uncertainty. War abroad, change at home, fears of nuclear disaster. In such times, collective anxiety often manifests through symbols, through stories that give form to the unseen. Mothman, they say, was never about a monster, but about meaning, the mind's attempt to warn itself of something too heavy to name. And yet, not everyone accepts that view. Some researchers, revisiting the case decades later, found new witnesses, people who had stayed silent out of fear of ridicule. Their accounts echoed the old ones, a being that could move without sound, with eyes that glowed like coals, wings that caught no wind. Some even described dreams before the bridge collapse, dreams of water, metal, and falling lights. It is easy, perhaps, to dismiss it all as coincidence, but the comfort of disbelief doesn't erase the strangeness of experience. There is a quiet truth beneath such stories, that sometimes humanity encounters what it cannot understand, and instead of answers it receives symbols. In this way, Mothman endures, not as a creature of terror, but as an emblem of mystery's gentler side, a reminder that the unknown does not always arrive to harm but to humble. Picture now the riverbank at night. The wind has stilled. The reflection of the moon drifts over black water. In the distance, something passes across it. Just a shadow, graceful and silent. It moves beyond sight, but the feeling it leaves behind is oddly peaceful. Perhaps that is how legends survive, not in fear, but in quiet curiosity. And so the story of Mothman settles into the night, another chapter of wonder, half remembered, half believed. The hills of West Virginia hold their silence well. When night settles over the valleys, it doesn't simply arrive, it sinks like smoke, filling every hollow and field. Houses dim, the roads empty, and the air grows heavy with the scent of river water and coal dust. It's a kind of quiet that invites reflection, the same stillness in which stories like Mothman's never truly end. For long after the bridge fell, after the news crews left and the headlines faded, the people of Point Pleasant continued to remember. Some recalled dreams of lights above the river. Others spoke of phone calls filled with static, of voices that vanished mid-sentence. A few said they saw figures, men in dark suits and pale faces, who asked questions about things they could not have known. They were polite, unsettlingly so. They didn't threaten, but their presence lingered in the mind like an echo that refuses to fade. Those who experienced these visits came to call them the Men in Black, not in the way pop culture would later imagine them, but as something older, colder, and strange. Whether real agents or spectral messengers, their connection to the Mothman legend deepened the town's sense that something larger was unfolding, that they had become part of a pattern whose full shape no one could see. John Keel, during his time in Point Pleasant, received phone calls from strange numbers, sometimes silent, sometimes filled with mechanical voices that repeated phrases or laughed softly before disconnecting. He began to feel as if he were part of the story he had come to document. In his notes, he wrote that he could no longer tell where the facts ended and the myth began. That blurring, the point where observation becomes participation, lies at the heart of Mothman's enduring hold. And yet, despite the unsettling nature of the tale, there is also something deeply human in it. The people of Point Pleasant didn't turn to violence or panic. They shared stories quietly, over kitchen tables, in church parking lots, by the glow of porch lights. Fear became folklore, and folklore became a way to process what they couldn't explain. Folklorists often note how such legends emerge not to terrify, but to comfort. They turn chaos into pattern, transforming random tragedy or unexplained events into a narrative with meaning. Mothman's story gave the town a language for grief. In that way, the creature became not a monster at all, but a symbol of the thin line between knowing and mystery, tragedy and transcendence. Through the 1970s and 1980s, researchers continued to visit Point Pleasant. Some came armed with scientific curiosity, others with spiritual conviction. The landscape itself seemed to invite both approaches: the dense woods, the fog rolling off the Ohio River, the faint hum of the distant industrial plants. Even when nothing appeared, the air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. A few residents claimed that after the bridge collapse, the sightings changed. The red-eyed being no longer followed cars or perched on rooftops, but appeared in dreams. One woman said she saw Mothman standing by her bed, silent, wings unfurled, but still. He didn't frighten her. Instead, she described feeling a deep sadness, as though the creature itself mourned what had happened. When she woke, the room smelled faintly of ozone, the scent that lingers after lightning. Stories like hers blur the boundaries between waking and sleep, fear and peace, and that is where Mothman lives most comfortably, not as a physical being, but as a threshold, a symbol of the unknown watching back. In more recent years, scientists have examined the possibility that the phenomenon may have psychological roots. Some propose collective perception, a theory suggesting that once an idea is seeded in a community, sightings can multiply through expectation. A shadow, a crane, a trick of light, all filtered through a shared story, become something else entirely. Others point to the region's unique geography. Low-lying fog, chemical residue from the old TNT bunkers, and the glare of headlights against river mist could all distort perception, creating the illusion of red eyes glowing in the dark. And yet, even with every rational explanation, something resists dismissal, because legends like Mothman's are not about logic, they're about the persistence of wonder. When people gather in Point Pleasant today for the annual festival, they don't come out of fear, they come out of affection. They stroll through streets lined with handmade art, eat funnel cakes under banners painted with wings, and pose by the gleaming silver statue. The air hums with laughter, with stories retold in the soft drawl of West Virginia accents. Children wear paper wings, couples buy postcards, elders tell the same tales their parents once whispered when the river fog rolled in. And somewhere in that joy is the true endurance of the legend. Because Mothman has become less a creature than a connection between past and present, between what we can explain and what we still hope to feel. If you stand by the river at dusk, you can see the town reflected on its surface, the streetlights flickering like a constellation. The rebuilt bridge arches quietly over the water, cars crossing in single file, their headlights gliding like slow-moving stars. The air smells faintly of iron and rain. And if you wait long enough, when the wind shifts just right, you might hear it, a soft rustle, a distant flutter that could be a bird, could be the memory of wings. The sound fades almost as soon as it comes, but it leaves something behind. Not fear, not proof, but presence. Because that's how the Mothman story endures, not in the darkness that once frightened, but in the quiet recognition that mystery itself can be kind. Perhaps in the end, Mothman was never a warning of tragedy, but a guardian of awareness, a symbol reminding us to look closely, to feel deeply, to notice the world around us before it changes. And so the story lingers, gentle now like the hum of wind beneath a bridge that no longer stands. The river flows on, carrying reflections of red light, silver steel, and memory. When you close your eyes, you can almost see him, wings outstretched, hovering above the water. Neither spirit nor shadow, but something in between, watching, waiting, reminding that in every quiet place, in every darkened town, there are still stories that breathe. From the foggy rivers of West Virginia, our path now drifts south to the arid plains and moonlit hills of Latin America, where goats vanish in the night and whispers speak of a creature with fangs like knives. Its name means the goat sucker, and its legend slinks between fear and fascination. Under the pale glow of a Caribbean moon, where dry winds move through thorn and cactus, farmers once woke to find their animals silent and their livestock drained of blood. Tracks led nowhere. No howl broke the night. Only the whisper of something unseen, moving between the shadows of banana trees and rusted fences. They called it El Chupacabra, the goat sucker, a creature born not from the deep forests or old myth, but from the modern world's unease, where folklore and fear met in the glow of television screens and desert starlight. The legend of the Chupacabra began, as many do, with whispers carried on hot wind. It was 1995, in Puerto Rico, an island of lush mountains and winding coastal roads, where tropical rain clouds meet the heat of the Caribbean sun. In the small town of Canalvanas, north of San Juan, reports began to surface of strange killings. Farmers would wake to find goats, chickens, and dogs dead in their pens, with small circular punctures on their necks. The bodies were bloodless. It wasn't the first time livestock had been attacked in rural communities, but the details were too strange to ignore. Eyewitnesses began to describe seeing a creature, small but powerful, grey-green skin stretched tight over muscle, spines running down its back. It walked upright, with glowing red eyes and long, sharp claws. Some said it hissed like a snake. Others claimed it could leap from trees or vanish into the night in a blur of motion. The name came quickly, Chupacabra, from the Spanish chupa, to suck, and cabra, goat. Within weeks, the island's newspapers were filled with reports. The mayor of Canovanas, Jose Camo Soto, even organized nightly patrols to hunt the creature, riding through the hills with armed volunteers. Television crews followed, capturing images of men with flashlights moving through banana groves, their beams cutting through humid darkness. The story spread like wildfire. Soon, reports emerged across Latin America, in the Dominican Republic, in Mexico, in Chile. Each new account reshaped the creature slightly. In some places it was described as reptilian, with leathery wings and glowing eyes. In others it looked more like a wild dog with sharp teeth and mangy fur. The legend mutated as it moved, taking on local colour, adapting to new fears. By 1996, the Chupacabra had reached the United States, first in Florida and then in Texas. Ranchers near the border began to find their animals dead in similar ways, drained, untouched by scavengers. In the dry fields and dusty roads of South Texas, the story grew. Some said it was a secret government experiment gone wrong, escaped from a nearby lab. Others believed it was alien, a creature left behind after a UFO landing. The Chupacabra became a creature of globalization, a myth that crossed borders as easily as news did. Unlike older cryptids, born from centuries of oral tradition, this one came to life in an era of satellites, talk shows, and late-night radio. It reflected the anxieties of its time, genetic experiments, contamination, secrecy, and the blurring line between science and the supernatural. Yet beneath the sensational headlines, the fear was real. In the rural outskirts of San Juan, families locked their animals inside at night. Farmers set up lights and motion sensors. Children whispered stories of red eyes shining through the sugarcane. In Mexico, people left offerings at the edges of their fields, asking the old spirits of the land for protection. The Chupacabra became not just a monster but a modern folk belief, a warning that even in the age of reason there were still things that reason could not soothe. Scientists who examined the dead animals found no evidence of supernatural attack. Most were the victims of dogs, coyotes, or disease. The lack of blood, they explained, was due to post-mortem drainage, a natural process misread as vampiric. But the explanations did little to quiet the imagination. Because for those who had seen it, or believed they had, the creature was not a theory, it was a memory. In one famous account, a woman named Madeline Tolentino described seeing the creature outside her window in Canovanas. Her description: reptilian skin, large eyes, spikes down the spine became the template for nearly every sighting that followed. Skeptics later noted that the 1995 film Species had just been released, featuring an alien creature strikingly similar in appearance. They suggested that the image from cinema had merged with fear and rumour to form a living myth. But that's how stories evolve. Half memory, half mirror. The Chupacabra didn't need to exist in flesh and blood. It existed in the overlap between imagination and fear, a creature of cultural crossroads. Over the years, the creature changed shape again. In the early 2000s, ranchers in Texas began reporting strange, hairless animals found dead near roads or caught on camera. These bodies, small and gaunt with blue-grey skin and elongated faces, were quickly labelled Chupacabras. Biologists who examined them found they were coyotes suffering from severe mange, a parasitic disease that strips fur and hardens skin. But by then, the myth had already adapted. The reptilian alien of Puerto Rico had become the canine vampire of the American Southwest. Folklorists began to note how flexible the Chupacabra had become, a reflection of each culture's fears. In Puerto Rico, it spoke to unease about modern science and foreign influence. In Mexico, it embodied border tension and government distrust. In the United States, it reflected the anxiety of rural isolation and the vanishing frontier. One legend, many meanings. And yet, despite its shifting form, something remained constant. The feeling of being watched from the dark, of waking to find the world slightly altered. Like Bigfoot's footprints or Nessie's ripples, the Chupacabra left no proof, only suggestion, and perhaps that's what keeps it alive. Today, the story has softened. Children in San Juan tell it around campfires during summer nights. Cartoon versions of the creature appear in art and television. In some towns, it has even become a local mascot. Its once terrifying image now playful, part of the cultural rhythm. But when the wind passes through the cane fields just right, when dogs bark at nothing and the night seems to hold its breath, people still remember the summer when fear had a name. There is something strangely poetic about it, how quickly myth can form, and how deeply it can root itself. In just a few decades, the Chupacabra joined the ancient company of Bigfoot and Nessie, proving that even in the modern world, mystery still finds a way. Imagine standing now beneath that Caribbean sky. The air is warm, the insects sing their endless chorus. In the distance, the lights of a small farmhouse flicker. The animals are quiet. The moon hangs low, and for a moment something rustles beyond the fence. A shadow, quick, graceful, gone. You might smile, knowing it's probably nothing. But part of you listens a little longer, just in case. Perhaps in the end, that's all the Chupacabra ever wanted. Not belief, but attention. A reminder that even now, we are not beyond the reach of wonder or the old fear of the dark. The night over Puerto Rico holds its warmth long after the sun has gone. Cicadas hum. The air smells of salt and soil. Between the dark rows of sugarcane, the world feels both close and infinite, a tapestry of whispers, wind and waiting. It is here, in these hours when the horizon glows faintly silver, that the Chupacabra legend feels most alive. Even decades after those first reports, stories still surface softly now, passed more as memories than warnings. A farmer might pause while fixing a fence, gaze toward the tray line, and recall the night his grandfather swore he saw eyes glowing red beyond the field. A fisherman might tell his children how the dogs once barked for hours, as if something had walked the banks of the river unseen. No one speaks with fear anymore, but with a kind of fondness, as though the creature has become part of the landscape itself. In the countryside of Mexico, tales of El Chupacabras linger in the glow of roadside shrines and truck-stop diners. Travelers say that when the desert wind picks up, it sometimes carries the faint bleating of goats from nowhere. In tiny villages, murals of the creature adorn market walls, sometimes fierce, sometimes comical, a modern saint of superstition. Street vendors sell small clay figures, their teeth bared in playful defiance. What began as dread has settled into myth, and myth has become identity. But the Chupacabra story also reveals something deeper about humanity's relationship with the unknown. It is one of the few cryptids born entirely within living memory. Its creation witnessed, its spread traceable. Scholars often call it the first global monster of the information age. Before the internet, folklore moved slowly, carried by word of mouth and generations. The Chupacabra spread in weeks, leaping across languages, borders, and broadcast signals. It showed how myths evolve when the world becomes connected, how fear, fascination, and storytelling can move faster than proof. And yet, for all its modern roots, the creature carries echoes of something ancient. The draining of blood, the nocturnal visits, the trembling livestock. These are motifs as old as humanity itself. Across cultures, blood has always symbolized life, essence, spirit. Myths of blood drinkers, from Europe's vampires to Africa's Azaman and South America's Pisteco, reflect our oldest anxieties about life's fragility. The Chupacabra, in this sense, is a new mask worn by an older archetype, the predator that crosses the threshold between worlds, feeding on the border between the living and the unseen. Folklorist Maria de los Santos once wrote that the Chupacabra is not a monster of the night, it is a story of control lost. She meant that such legends often emerge when people feel powerless, when crops fail, when governments falter, when the world grows strange. To name a creature is to tame the chaos, if only in words. By giving fear a face, we make it something we can understand. That may explain why the creature changed shape so easily. In Puerto Rico, it was reptilian, an alien invader, sleek and supernatural. In Texas, it became canine, a scavenger of forgotten roads. In Chile, it took to the skies. In each form, it matched the fears of the people who told the tale. It was never one thing. It was a reflection of each culture's shadow. And yet, as time passed, the tone shifted. Television shows began to treat it with humour. Artists painted it as a misunderstood guardian of the island. Poets wrote that perhaps the Chupacabra was not hunting goats at all, but searching for belonging, a creature as confused by the modern world as we are. Somewhere in that reinterpretation lies a kind of peace, because when myths soften, they stop frightening and start teaching. They remind us that imagination itself is a living thing, and that it too needs places to hide. So imagine now a quiet night on the edge of the desert. The moon is thin, the stars scattered like salt. A lone farmhouse rests beneath the whispering wind. Inside, the lights are low. Outside, the air is still. Somewhere far off, a coyote howls, long, mournful, but natural. And for a moment, you think you see movement by the fence, a flash of something smooth and pale beneath the cactus. But when you look again, there's only the trembling of the grass. The night exhales. The world is calm again. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything the mind wanted to see. The Chupacabra lives there now, not in shadows or screams, but in that fleeting space where the known and the unknown meet, where the heart quickens for no reason at all. And when dawn finally comes, washing gold over the dry fields and the blue mountains, the legend rests once more. The goats bleat, the roosters call, the world moves on, but somewhere deep in the mind of anyone who has ever stared into darkness, a quiet part still listens. Perhaps in the end, the Chupacabra was never about blood or beasts. Perhaps it was always about the stories we tell to feel safe again. From the heat of the tropics and the pulse of the desert, our journey now turns north to lands of frost and forest, where hunger wears a human face and winter never fully ends. Far to the north, where forests stretch endless and the air itself seems to whisper, the cold has a voice. It moves through pine and birch, over frozen lakes and silent rivers, carrying stories of hunger that cannot be filled. In the long winters of the Great Lakes and the boreal wilds, people once spoke of a creature born from starvation and greed, a spirit that feasts not on flesh alone, but on the soul of those who forget what it means to be human. They called it the Wendigo, the eater of men, and the shadow of winter itself. Snow muffles sound in a way that feels otherworldly. It takes the noise of wind, the crack of branches, the rhythm of breath, and wraps it in stillness. In the deep north, that silence becomes a world of its own. The trees groan under ice, the air bites, and within that hush, people have always sensed something listening. The Wendigo is one of the oldest and most haunting figures in North American legend. Its name echoes through the oral traditions of the Algonquian-speaking peoples, the Cree, Ojibwe, Algonquin, and others who have called the northern forests home for millennia. To them, the Wendigo was not a single monster, but a warning, a story to remind communities what happens when the human spirit breaks under the weight of isolation and hunger. Long before settlers arrived, the people of these lands understood the danger of the cold. Winter could be merciless, food could run out, families could be trapped by snowdrifts so high that even the stars seemed unreachable. In that desperation, the Wendigo was said to appear, tall and gaunt, its ribs pressing against skin stretched thin as birch bark. Its eyes glowed with frost, its lips were torn and blackened, and its voice when it came was the sound of cracking ice. It was not merely a beast, but a spirit of imbalance, a reflection of greed and the endless hunger that dwells inside all living things. Once a human, the stories say, the Wendigo was born when a person consumed the flesh of another to survive the famine. In that act, they cursed themselves, condemned to wander forever, hungry but never sated, their heart encased in ice. Among the Cree, the Wendigo was said to roam the edges of villages during long winters, howling in the distance, tempting the desperate. The Anishinaabe described it as both a creature and a sickness. Wendigo Wekan, the Wendigo disease in which greed or isolation could consume a person's soul. Those who dreamt of the Wendigo were urged to confess their hunger, to share what they had before the spirit could take hold. When European fur traders and missionaries arrived in the 17th and 18th centuries, they recorded these stories with awe and unease. They wrote of the Wendigo or Windigo as a giant cannibalistic monster roaming the forests. But in doing so, they missed the deeper truth, that it was not a tale of monsters but of morality. The Wendigo was not evil for the sake of evil. It was the embodiment of what happens when survival eclipses compassion. Still, the image endured. In the 19th century, reports began to circulate of people in remote northern outposts claiming to be possessed by the Wendigo spirit, overcome by insatiable hunger, fearing they would harm others. One of the most famous accounts was that of Swift Runner, a Cree man who, in the winter of 1879, killed and consumed his family during a famine in Alberta. He later confessed that he believed the Wendigo had entered him. His story spread through the Canadian frontier, fueling both horror and fascination. For settlers unfamiliar with indigenous spirituality, the Wendigo became a literal monster, a creature of the woods to be hunted or feared. For native peoples, it remained something far more complex, a symbol of imbalance, greed, and the dangers of forgetting the sacred bonds between people, land, and community. The forests where these stories were born are vast. Even today, they stretch unbroken for hundreds of miles, spruce, pine, and cedar, standing like dark sentinels against the snow. In such places, it's easy to see how a whisper of wind could sound like a voice, how the groan of a tree could resemble a cry. Nature itself seems alive, aware, capable of reflecting human emotion. When the temperature drops so low that even breath turns to ice, it's not hard to imagine something walking beside you in the dark, something older than language, older than fear. Anthropologists later described the Wendigo as a cultural lens, a way for communities to speak about excess and the dangers of losing balance. But even they admitted that the legend feels too vivid to be merely symbolic. There are stories from trappers who claim to find enormous footprints in the snow, spaced too far apart for any known animal. Others spoke of hearing distant wails that began as human but ended as something else. In some traditions, the Wendigo is said to have a heart of ice that can only be melted by fire. In others, it can be destroyed only when its name is spoken aloud, forcing the truth of its existence into the open, where it loses power. Both versions speak to a deep truth. That confession, light and warmth, are the antidotes to hunger and despair. Over time, the Wendigo has been reimagined in stories, films, and modern art. But the original warning remains. It is not simply about cold winters or starvation. It is about the insatiable nature of desire itself. The idea that one can have everything consume endlessly and still feel empty. The Wendigo, in this sense, is not frozen in myth. It walks quietly through modern life, wearing new faces, greed, excess, exploitation, each a hunger without end. And yet beneath that darkness there is beauty in the story too. Because the Wendigo exists not only to terrify but to teach. It reminds us that warmth, generosity, community, empathy is the only fire strong enough to survive the longest winter. Imagine now standing in the forest as night falls. Snow drifts gently between the trees. The world glows blue and white beneath the moon. The cold bites at your skin, but it also sharpens your senses, the creak of branches, the whisper of wind, the faint, distant crunch of footsteps. For a moment you think you see something move among the trunks, tall, thin, silent, then only stillness. You listen. Nothing. Only the sound of your own breath, slow and steady in the freezing air. Perhaps what you felt wasn't danger at all, but memory, the echo of those who lived and endured before you, their warnings carried on the same winter wind. The Wendigo may have vanished into the folklore of another age, but its lesson lingers. That hunger can take many forms. That kindness is warmth in a world of ice. And that some stories exist not to frighten us, but to remind us how easily we can forget to be human. The cold has a way of holding memory. In the northern forests, even after footprints fade, even after campfires die, the air seems to remember the smell of wood smoke, the weight of silence, the feeling of eyes watching from between the trees. This is Wendigo country, where stories cling to the snow like shadows that never melt. Long before maps drew borders across these lands, the people who lived here carried the story in song and caution. Elders would tell it slowly, by firelight, their voices low and rhythmic, so the lesson would not be forgotten. They spoke of winters when hunger gnawed not only at the stomach but at the heart, when the body could endure no more, but the spirit still whispered of survival at any cost. And in those moments when compassion fell to the cold, the Wendigo would come. The stories were not meant to entertain, they were meant to preserve balance. Among the Ojibwe, children were taught that to give, even when one has little, is the surest way to keep the Wendigo away. Among the Cree, hunters would share meat even in times of scarcity, for to hoard it was to invite the spirit's gaze. The Wendigo, they said, lives where kindness dies. But there were other tales, quieter and more mournful. They told of those who saw the Wendigo and were changed by it, not taken, not killed, but hollowed. One legend speaks of a trapper who wandered too far during a storm. He found himself lost for days, starving, his fire dwindling. One night, he heard a voice behind him whisper his name. When he turned, he saw nothing, only snow swirling through the trees. The voice came again, closer, softer, familiar. It sounded like his own. "Eat," it said. "You must eat." When they found him weeks later, his eyes were open but empty, his campfire long gone cold. Around him lay the remains of what had once been his hunting dogs. The people buried him in a shallow grave and whispered a prayer to the north wind. They said the Wendigo had passed through him like frost through glass, leaving cracks that never healed. For the Algonquin, the Wendigo was sometimes described as having the power to possess the desperate. It didn't always appear as a creature stalking the woods. Sometimes it slipped quietly into dreams, or into the voice of one's own hunger. And that, perhaps, was its most terrifying form. Not the beast with fangs, but the thought that survival might cost one's humanity. In the 20th century, psychologists and anthropologists gave the phenomenon a name: Wendigo psychosis, a rare cultural syndrome reported among northern indigenous peoples, where individuals under extreme duress came to believe they were transforming into the very creature their ancestors feared. These cases, though few, reflected how deeply myth and mind intertwine, how belief can shape the boundaries of what feels real. One account, recorded by anthropologist Morton Tyker in the 1930s, described a man who confessed to dreams of devouring his own family. The community's elders held a ritual, burning cedar and singing through the night to cleanse his spirit before the hunger could take root. They did not see it as madness, but as imbalance, something that could be soothed by remembrance of kinship. To them, the Wendigo was not just a spirit of cannibalism, it was the embodiment of forgetting who we are to each other. And that forgetting could happen in many forms: greed, cruelty, the desire to consume more than the earth can give. Modern writers have drawn parallels between the Wendigo and the cost of expansion, logging, mining, the devouring of land for profit. The forests, once sacred, now echo with machines. The Wendigo's hunger, they say, has moved into humanity itself, consuming the world it once haunted. It is a myth that continues to evolve, turning from cautionary tale into mirror. Yet amid these reflections, there is still a strange comfort in the story. Because if hunger can consume, then generosity can heal. And in telling the story, even now, in a world of cities and screens, we feed something gentler: remembrance. Imagine, for a moment, sitting by a northern lake in winter. The surface is frozen, the stars bright enough to see your breath. The trees groan softly as the wind brushes through their needles. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls, not in menace, but in communion. Its call echoes across the water, answered faintly by another, then another, until the forest hums with a kind of living chorus. The Wendigo's presence, if it lingers at all, feels different now. Less a monster waiting in the cold, more a spirit reminding you to keep the fire lit, remember warmth, even when the world grows dark. Perhaps in the end, that is why the legend endures, because it holds both shadow and light, fear of what we could become, and faith that we can still choose otherwise. The snow begins to fall again, soft and endless. The trees bend under its weight. You can almost hear the whisper, not of hunger this time, but of forgiveness. The Wendigo fades into that sound, a lesson carried forward on every flake that touches the earth. And when the wind quiets, the world is left clean still and full of the possibility of kindness. From the frozen silence of the northern forests, our journey lifts upward into the open skies, where thunder speaks in the voice of gods and wings blot out the sun. Ancient peoples saw it not as a beast, but as a messenger of power and change. Across the boundless sky of North America, where storms roll like mountains and lightning splits the heavens, people once looked upward and saw power made flesh. Wings that could blot out the sun, feathers that shimmered like rain, and eyes that glowed with the memory of thunder. They called it the Thunderbird, a being older than language, a messenger between worlds, carrying storms on its back. And when its wings beat across the clouds, the earth below trembled, remembering that even the sky has its spirits. There are few silences as vast as the silence after thunder. That still, breathless pause before the rain, when the clouds hang heavy and the air smells of metal and anticipation. For countless generations of indigenous peoples across North America, that moment held meaning. It was said that before lightning flashed, the Thunderbird had stirred. The Thunderbird is among the most powerful and widespread figures in Native American mythology, known from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Plains, the Great Lakes, and beyond. Though its form and name vary between nations, the spirit it represents remains the same, a divine guardian, a being of immense power and mystery, living in the space between sky and storm. To the Anishinaabe, it is Anamiki, the Thunderer, who dwells beyond the clouds and beats its wings to make thunder. To the Lakota, it is Wakisin, a sacred spirit who brings the storms that cleanse the world. To the Kwakwaka'wakw of the Pacific coast, it is a mighty bird with lightning snakes clutched in its talons. Its cry splits the sky, its feathers shimmer with rain. In every telling, the Thunderbird is not a creature of destruction but of balance. It brings storms, but also the water that nourishes life. It reminds people that power and creation are intertwined, that renewal often arrives with noise and light. Long before European contact, stories of the Thunderbird were painted onto rock faces and carved into totems. Across the Great Lakes region, petroglyphs depict enormous birds with outstretched wings, often facing serpentine shapes, the underworld spirits of water and chaos. The Thunderbird, in these depictions, was the eternal counterforce. Sky versus water, order versus chaos, renewal versus decay. The stories vary in their details, but all carry reverence. Among the Menominee of the Wisconsin forests, it was said that 4 great thunderbirds lived upon a sacred mountain to the west. Each faced a cardinal direction, controlling the winds and seasons. When evil spirits from the underworld rose to cause sickness or drought, the thunderbirds would drive them back with lightning. To see a storm rolling in from the horizon was to witness not danger but protection. In the Plains traditions, the Thunderbird was tied to leadership and bravery. Warriors painted its symbol on shields or wore feathers representing its power. The thunderclap itself was seen as the sound of its approval, a reminder that courage must always walk beside humility. There are even stories of human encounters. One old tale, told among the Lakota, speaks of a man who sought wisdom and fasted alone on a high plateau. On the 4th night, lightning struck nearby, and when he opened his eyes, a massive shadow passed above wings, stretching from one end of the horizon to the other. The wind it carried nearly lifted him from the ground. He fell to his knees, covering his face, and when he looked up again, the sky was clear. From that day forward, he was said to carry the Thunderbird's blessing, a spirit of renewal in his dreams, and thunder in his voice when he spoke truth. Even now, in quiet corners of the Great Plains, some elders say that certain storms carry more than just rain. They carry presence, a weight in the air, a pulse of awareness, as if something vast moves within the clouds. When European settlers began hearing these stories, they often misinterpreted them as simple myths, confusing reverence for literal belief. But to the people who told them, the Thunderbird was not superstition, it was relationship, a way of seeing nature as alive, sacred and connected to the human spirit. It is said that when the Thunderbird sleeps, the world grows too quiet. Crops fail, rain forgets its rhythm, and people lose touch with gratitude. When it wakes, the storms return, fierce, cleansing, necessary. In the Pacific Northwest, the Thunderbird is often carved high atop totem poles, its wings outspread over the clan's stories. Below it are the animals and ancestors of the people, salmon, bear, wolf, all grounded beneath the sky's guardian. The Thunderbird at the top reminds all who pass that the sky watches, and that balance between the seen and unseen must be maintained. Through centuries, the legend adapted. As contact with settlers brought hardship, disease, displacement, loss, the Thunderbird remained a symbol of resilience. Its thunder became the sound of survival, its lightning the spark of memory that refused to be extinguished. When storms rolled across the plains or the coasts, some saw them as reminders that the spirits had not forgotten their children. In the 19th century, a few stories emerged from non-native sources that blurred myth with curiosity. Frontier newspapers told of enormous birds shot by hunters in the American West, creatures with wingspans greater than any eagle, their feathers like polished leather. Most of these were exaggerations or misunderstandings, yet the fascination endured. One such account from 1890 described cowboys in Arizona claiming to have killed a winged monster resembling a pterodactyl. The tale spread quickly, adding fuel to the Thunderbird's modern legend, a symbol of how myth and the need for wonder never fully part ways. Even in the age of airplanes and satellites, people still report strange shapes in the sky, large shadows gliding silently over canyons, wings too vast to belong to any known bird. The rational mind says optical illusion, yet the old stories whisper otherwise. Maybe not the Thunderbird itself, but a memory of it, the sky's heartbeat echoing through our collective imagination. What makes the Thunderbird enduring is not its potential reality, but its symbolism. It reminds us that power can be sacred, that strength should protect, not destroy. It is the thunder that nourishes, the lightning that clears the old so the new may grow. In its shadow, we remember that even chaos can serve renewal. Close your eyes and imagine standing on a high ridge as a storm approaches. The sky darkens. The air grows charged, alive. You feel the hair on your arms lift as electricity dances invisibly through the wind. Then, far off, the horizon flickers, a pulse of white, a low rolling sound that shakes your chest. It grows, rolling closer, until the rain begins to fall in heavy rhythmic drops. Above it all, for a heartbeat, you think you hear wings, not of fear, but of awe, as though the sky itself is alive, breathing, moving, remembering. And when the thunder breaks, it feels less like noise and more like music. The oldest song in the world, still echoing after all these years. The thunder fades, rolling away across the hills like the slow retreat of a heartbeat. Rain lingers in the air, mist rising from the ground in ghostly ribbons. The scent of wet earth and pine mingles with ozone, that sharp metallic fragrance that always follows lightning. The storm has passed, but something in the silence feels changed, charged, as if the air itself remembers what has just moved through it. Those who lived by the rhythm of the land always said that the Thunderbird's passing was not an end, but a renewal. The downpour it brought fed the rivers. The lightning it carried ignited the forests in places where new growth was needed. Destruction and creation, inseparable, the dual faces of balance that define the natural world. Among the plains tribes, elders told stories that storms were conversations between thunderbirds, distant kin calling to one another across the horizon. Each thunderclap, each flash of light, a message that only the spirits could understand. The people listened and waited, reading the sky the way one might read a sacred text. If the thunder rolled long and low, it meant the Thunderbird was content. If it cracked sharply and quickly, it meant something had disturbed the balance, a sign to proceed with care. When the rain ended and the sky opened once more, people would step outside their lodges and raise their hands to the clouds, whispering gratitude, not to plead for safety, but to acknowledge the exchange, life given through storm, harmony restored through awe. In many cultures, the Thunderbird was also linked to transformation, both physical and spiritual. To see lightning strike a tree was to witness a sacred moment, a meeting between heaven and earth. Shamans would sometimes collect splinters of these lightning trees, believing them infused with the Thunderbird's power. The wood was used to carve talismans or staffs meant to protect against evil, to call rain, or to carry messages to the spirit world. One old Ojibwe tale tells of a time when a young boy wandered too far into the forest during a storm. He was struck by lightning, yet survived, though when he awoke his eyes held a faint blue shimmer. The elders said the Thunderbird had chosen him. From that day he could sense when storms were coming, even under a clear sky. He grew into a wise man, one who spoke softly and walked gently, saying that the thunder was not something to fear, but to remember. The Thunderbird, in this sense, was never a monster to be hunted or a god to be worshipped. It was a teacher, one that reminded humans of their place in the greater cycle. It showed that even power beyond comprehension could serve life if guided by balance. Artists who carved its image in cedar, in stone, in paint, did so with reverence. In Haida and Tlingit traditions of the Pacific Northwest, Thunderbird totems often perch atop poles with their wings outspread, guarding the stories beneath them. Each carving tells of lineage and duty, of connection between sky, sea, and earth. The Thunderbird is placed at the highest point, not as a ruler, but as a protector. Its wings shield the memories of the people. Further inland, the Sioux and Blackfoot painted Thunderbirds onto drums and hides, their curved beaks and lightning motifs calling strength into ceremonies. The rhythm of the drum, steady, resonant, echoing through the night, was said to be the Thunderbird's own heartbeat, the pulse of the sky itself. Even in the 21st century, when storms sweep across the plains, there are those who still feel the Thunderbird's presence. In North Dakota, elders have spoken of strange lights flashing within clouds where no lightning should be. In Ontario, fishermen have watched storm fronts roll in across the lakes, the thunder deep and rhythmic like enormous wings flapping in slow motion. Science explains it as atmospheric pressure, as heat and cold colliding. But for those who listen, the explanation feels smaller than the truth. Because sometimes belief isn't about rejecting science, it's about preserving wonder. The Thunderbird exists as both the storm we can measure and the mystery we cannot. It is also a story of perspective. To some, thunder is frightening, loud, uncontrollable, a reminder of nature's might. To others, it is a blessing, a song of renewal, a reminder that the world still breathes, that power can move without cruelty. The legend reminds us that awe is the beginning of wisdom. To stand before a storm is to stand before something larger than oneself, and to feel not fear but connection. The Thunderbird's wings stretch over centuries, uniting people across languages and landscapes in that shared reverence. If you listen closely after the thunder fades, you can sometimes hear the softest sounds of all, raindrops sliding from leaf to leaf, the earth drinking deeply, and far above, the sigh of wind moving through the clearing clouds. In that quiet, the Thunderbird still flies, not in the sky, but in the collective breath of the world, alive with gratitude and renewal. So when the next storm comes and lightning illuminates the night for an instant, remember, it is not only a force to fear, but a reminder of power held in balance, of the sky speaking and the earth listening. The Thunderbird, vast and unseen, passes on its wings, now hidden in the clouds, its presence lingering in the calm that follows, and once again the world feels cleansed, alive and ready to grow. As the last echoes of thunder drift into silence and the clouds dissolve into twilight, our journey leaves the open sky and descends into the heart of the earth, to a place where the air is heavy and green, and where another ancient being is said to stir beneath still waters. Deep in the Congo basin, explorers once whispered of a creature unlike any known to science, neither myth nor machine, but something left behind by time itself. Deep within the heart of Central Africa, where the jungle breathes and rivers twist like veins of brown glass, there are whispers of something ancient that still moves beneath the water. The locals call it Mokele-Mbembe, the one who stops the flow of rivers. Some say it is a spirit, others a creature left behind from another age, a living relic of a time when giants walked the earth. And though centuries have passed and science has mapped nearly every shore, the Congo basin remains vast, wild, and full of secrets. In its shadowed waters, the legend endures, silent, patient, waiting. The Congo basin is a place that seems to exist outside of time. It is one of the most biodiverse regions on Earth, an emerald labyrinth of rainforest, swamp, and river stretching across 6 nations. Here the air is heavy with moisture and the scent of life. Insects drone like electricity. Vines hang thick between trees whose roots tangle in red mud. It is a world where sound and shadow merge, where a ripple in the water could mean a fish, a crocodile, or something much larger. For centuries, the people who have lived along the banks of the Congo River have spoken of a creature unlike any other. The Lingala name Mokele-Mbembe roughly translates to the one who stops the flow of rivers, a fitting name for something said to be as large as an elephant and strong enough to overturn canoes. Descriptions vary, but most tell of a massive, long-necked creature with a bulky body, smooth grey or brown skin, and a tail like that of a crocodile. It is not a predator, they say, but fiercely territorial, especially near certain deep bends in the river or sacred pools hidden among the trees. Unlike many cryptids, the story of Mokele-Mbembe has deep cultural roots. Among the Baker and Bauca peoples, tales of river spirits and great beasts have existed for generations, long before Western explorers arrived. These stories were not myths in the European sense, they were part of the living landscape, lessons about respect, danger, and the unseen guardians of the forest. To encounter Mokele-Mbembe was not to discover a monster, but to step too far into a realm that demanded humility. When the first European missionaries and traders reached the Congo in the late 18th and 19th centuries, they began to record these stories but through their own lens. To them, the descriptions sounded eerily familiar. They compared them to the long-extinct sauropods, the great plant-eating dinosaurs like Diplodocus and Apatosaurus that once roamed prehistoric Earth. Could such a creature, they wondered, still exist in this vast, unmapped wilderness? By the early 20th century, Mokele-Mbembe had become one of the most famous cryptids in the world, the African dinosaur. Expeditions were launched by explorers and adventurers, driven by a mix of curiosity, scientific ambition, and the romantic idea that the last survivors of a forgotten world might still swim in the Congo's hidden lakes. One of the earliest recorded accounts came from 1909, when German explorer Carl Hagenbeck wrote of hearing reports from local hunters of a half-elephant, half-dragon creature, said to dwell in the rivers of Central Africa. Hagenbeck, a zoo owner fascinated by exotic animals, speculated that it might be a living dinosaur. His words sparked global intrigue. In the decades that followed, others ventured deep into the jungle in search of proof. In 1913, a man named Hans Schomburg, another German explorer, claimed that tribes near Lake Bangweulu had described a large, long-necked creature that occasionally surfaced at dusk. Similar reports emerged in the 1930s, when missionary accounts spoke of large, unknown tracks found in swampy regions near the Ubangi River. Yet none of these stories came with solid evidence. No bones, no bodies, no photographs, clear enough to silence doubt. What they did produce, however, was fascination. For much of the 20th century, Mokele-Mbembe became the great mystery of African exploration, a question of whether the age of dinosaurs had truly ended. In 1980, a zoologist named Roy McCall led an expedition funded by the University of Chicago. With canoes, guides, and cameras, he spent months navigating the swamps of the Lukwala region, in what is now the Republic of the Congo. His team collected dozens of testimonies from local villagers who described seeing the creature always in the same way: large, grey, long-necked, with a single tooth or horn on its head. One fisherman claimed that a Mokele-Mbembe had overturned his canoe after he approached too close to its nesting site. Mackall returned twice more, convinced that the creature could be real, a surviving population of prehistoric reptiles adapted to the jungle's slow rivers and deep lakes. But as with all cryptid pursuits, the proof never came. The photos were inconclusive, the footprints unclear, the recordings distorted by jungle sounds. Still, the legend grew stronger. Over time, skeptics began to note that the creature's description seemed to evolve with exposure to Western ideas. Before colonization, the creature was a sacred river guardian, neither beast nor dinosaur, but spirit. After the arrival of explorers, the imagery shifted, taking on the traits of animals seen in textbooks and films. The myth, like the river itself, absorbed everything that entered it. And yet, those who have spent time in the Congo understand why belief persists. The jungle there is endless. Even with satellites and science, there remain regions so dense, so waterlogged, that few have ever entered. It is not difficult to imagine something large and elusive slipping quietly through that world, seen only in glimpses, felt only in ripples. A biologist once described standing at dawn on the edge of Lake Tele, deep in the Lukwala swamps. The air was thick, steaming, the water black and still. From somewhere across the mist came a slow, heavy splash, the kind made not by fish or crocodile, but by something with mass. Then silence again. He waited, listening, the sweat cooling on his skin. For a long time there was nothing, only the call of distant birds. Yet he said that, even after he left, he could not shake the feeling that the jungle was watching him. That is the power of Mokele-Mbembe. Not in its physical proof, but in its presence. It represents the last untouched corner of the world, the last mystery large enough to make even a scientist wonder. To the people of the Congo, the creature still carries meaning. Elders speak of it as a reminder of balance, that the river is alive, that greed or disrespect toward it brings misfortune. Hunters tell stories to children, teaching them that some places are not meant to be disturbed. And in this way, Mokele-Mbembe endures, not as a monster but as a sacred boundary between what humans can claim and what must remain untamed. Imagine now the Congo at night. The air hums with unseen life. Fireflies drift like embers above the water. In the distance, thunder murmurs far away, perhaps only memory. The river moves slowly, its surface unbroken, yet something deep below shifts, not in menace, but in patience. The jungle exhales, and the moment passes. Perhaps in the end the creature is not a relic of the past, but a guardian of mystery itself, the embodiment of everything that refuses to be fully known. And as the dawn light spills through the canopy, turning mist to gold, you realize that some legends are not meant to be proven. They exist to remind us that discovery, like the river, never truly ends. The rainforest breathes differently at night. When the last light fades behind the trees, the air seems to thicken, every sound deepening into rhythm, 1,000 creatures singing, clicking, and croaking into the dark. The river gleams like a vein of black glass, carrying the scent of wet earth and something ancient. This is the world of Mokele-Mbembe, a place where the line between myth and nature dissolves completely. The Congolese jungle has a way of humbling anyone who enters it. Its trees are older than memory, its air heavy with the pulse of creation itself. Even the smallest noise, a snapping twig, a splash of water, can stir the imagination into believing that something vast is moving just out of sight. It's in this setting that the legend of Mokele-Mbembe continues to live, generation after generation, as though the forest itself protects it. For those who call this land home, the stories are not told to invite outsiders' curiosity. They are stories of respect, of warning. The elders say that Mokele-Mbembe dwells in the deepest waters, emerging only when disturbed. To fish in its territory without permission is to risk its anger. Some claim to have seen it rise at dusk, lifting its long neck from the water like a breathing hill, its skin slick and shining in the half-light before sinking again into silence. Among the Baka and Baka, tales describe not a monster but a guardian spirit, one that keeps balance in the rivers, ensuring that no one takes more than they need. When floods come, it is said that the creature is stirring, reminding people that nature itself has limits. When droughts arrive, its absence is felt, and the villagers whisper prayers for its return. And still, the Western fascination with the legend grew. In the late 20th century, filmmakers and cryptozoologists began to arrive with cameras and notebooks, hoping to capture the impossible. One expedition in the 1980s brought a man named Herman Regustas and his wife, who spent several weeks travelling up the Likwala-Erbe River. They claimed to have heard a deep, resonant roar, something unlike any known animal. Regustas recorded the sound, describing it as a single hollow bellow that made the air tremble. The recording remains one of the few physical traces attributed to Mokele-Mbembe, though scientists have identified it as possibly belonging to a hippo. Yet those who have been there often say that no recording could ever capture the true essence of the place. The Congo is not just a landscape, it is an atmosphere, an awareness. Even skeptics, after days of travel under dense canopy, admit to feeling watched. The rivers wind endlessly, narrowing and vanishing into labyrinths of vegetation so thick that light itself seems to struggle. The sound of life is constant, and yet it can vanish in an instant, leaving a silence so profound that imagination rushes in to fill it. In this way, Mokele-Mbembe becomes more than legend. It becomes a symbol of mystery's last refuge. A reminder that even in an age of satellites and drones, there are places that cannot be mapped in pixels or data points. The creature stands at the edge of what humanity can know, not as defiance but as invitation, to remember wonder, to remember humility. For the people who live near Lake Teller, the legend holds power in quieter ways. They speak of nights when the water glows faintly under moonlight, and something disturbs the lilies, a wide, slow ripple, followed by a sound like the exhale of a great animal. Some describe the surface rising, not violently but smoothly, as if something large were shifting just below. When it sinks again, the water settles as though nothing had happened. Whether these moments are caused by manatee, hippo, or something unseen hardly matters. The story remains unchanged, not because people refuse truth, but because the truth they hold is different. It is not about what is proven, it is about what is felt. A scientist once remarked, "The Congo is not a place you conquer, it is a place that allows you to pass." That may also be true of Mokele-Mbembe. The creature endures not because it hides from us, but because it does not belong to our need for certainty. It belongs to the timeless rhythm of the forest, to the chorus of frogs, to the sigh of wind through the canopy, to the pulse of rivers that have never stopped moving. Imagine standing at dawn beside one of those rivers. Mist clings to the water, glowing softly in the first light. A heron stands motionless, its reflection barely rippling. Somewhere, far across the marsh, a low rumble breaks the stillness, deep and brief, like the earth clearing its throat. You turn your head, heart slowed by the humidity, listening. The sound doesn't come again, but the feeling it leaves behind lingers. Something immense, patient and unseen. Perhaps that is Mokele-Mbembe. Not a creature of flesh and bone, but the spirit of a world we are still learning how to see. And when you leave the jungle, when the hum of insects fades and the city noise returns, a part of you stays behind, still standing by that river, still listening. Because once you've looked into a place where mystery feels alive, you can never quite stop believing that somewhere something ancient is breathing just beneath the surface. So the river flows on, carrying the legend through the heart of Africa, a current of story older than language, deeper than proof. Perhaps the creature will never be found. Perhaps it doesn't wish to be. Either way, its purpose has been fulfilled. For as long as people still wonder, the world will never be truly known. From the steaming jungles of the Congo, our path now crosses the sea to a continent of ochre deserts and whispering swamps, where another legend hides beneath starlit skies. Its name is spoken softly in the Australian bush, where the reeds sway in warm wind and something unseen stirs the water. Across the vast and ancient landscapes of Australia, where rivers twist through red earth and mist gathers over moonlit billabongs, there are stories whispered by the water's edge. They speak of something that moves when the world is still, a shadow in the reeds, a shape beneath the surface. Its cry is said to echo like wind through hollow stone. The first peoples called it the Bunyip, the spirit of the swamps, guardian of the billabongs, and reminder that every quiet pool holds its own deep and watching mystery. Australia's interior hums with silence unlike any other place on Earth. The nights stretch endlessly, the stars so sharp they seem to hum, and the land itself feels alive, a mosaic of dust, water, and ancient memory. It is a place where time folds, where dream and daylight meet. And in this vast continent, the Bunyip has lived longer than any colony or city, drifting through both myth and murmur. For tens of thousands of years, Aboriginal Australians have spoken of creatures that dwell in the waterways, not monsters, but spirits tied to the land and its balance. The Bunyip was one such being. It was said to inhabit billabongs, the still, crescent-shaped pools left when rivers change course, as well as swamps and lagoons. Its presence was both warning and protection. The old stories told children to stay away from deep waters at night, not out of superstition, but out of wisdom, for beneath the surface lay the unknown, and the unknown must be respected. Descriptions of the Bunyip vary from region to region. To some it was enormous, with a sleek dark body and the head of a dog or seal. To others it was covered in shaggy hair, its call a mournful bellow that rose at dusk. Some said it had a long neck like a snake and flippers like a frog. Others whispered that it could change form, appearing as an animal one moment, and as a shadow the next. The one detail all accounts share is that it was most often heard, not seen. A sound like water groaning, like the deep moan of a wind moving through reeds. The oldest Aboriginal accounts rarely framed the Bunyip as evil. It was a spirit of consequence, a guardian of sacred places, a punisher of greed. It protected the balance between people and nature. If someone hunted more than they needed, or desecrated a sacred site, the Bunyip might drag them beneath the surface, not in cruelty but as correction. In this way it embodied the moral landscape of the dreaming, the deep time stories that shape law, behaviour and relationship with country. When Europeans arrived in Australia in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, They encountered these stories with a mix of curiosity and fear. Settlers working along rivers and creeks began reporting strange sounds at night, low moans, ripples that broke the surface when no wind stirred. In the 1840s, newspapers began printing accounts of the mysterious Bunyip, describing footprints larger than a man's hand and bones of unknown creatures found in riverbeds. One of the most famous discoveries occurred near Geelong, Victoria. In 1845, a set of enormous bones was found in the banks of a creek, and the local Aboriginal people identified them as belonging to a Bunyip. Scientists later examined them and speculated that they might belong to an extinct species of giant marsupial, perhaps a diprotodon, a massive wombat-like creature that had vanished thousands of years earlier. The thought that such beasts had once roamed the same land filled the colonists with both awe and unease. The Bunyip became, in their minds, not a spirit, but a survivor of prehistory, another living fossil, hiding in the unexplored reaches of the continent. Throughout the 19th century, the legend flourished. Travellers claimed to see the creature gliding through swamps at night, its eyes glinting like coals. Stockmen heard eerie wails that seemed to rise from beneath the ground itself. Newspapers published sketches, some resembling a seal, others a crocodile or giant bird. The word Bunyip entered common Australian slang, meaning something mysterious, powerful, and unseen. Even today, the term carries a faint echo of its mythic roots. But behind the colonists' fascination, the Aboriginal understanding endured, quieter, more sacred. The Bunyip remained not a beast to be hunted, but a presence to be acknowledged. Its story served as a reminder. Every waterhole is alive, every shadowed billabong has its own song. Anthropologists in the early 20th century began to record indigenous stories of the Bunyip as part of a broader system of spiritual ecology. In some regions, the creature was linked to the rainbow serpent, the great ancestral being of water, fertility and creation. In others, it was described as a local guardian spirit who maintained order within the dreaming's law. Each version held the same truth: the land itself watches and no action goes unseen. The modern world, of course, brought skepticism. Scientists explained away the mystery as a mix of misidentified animals, seals that had wandered upriver, birds calling through fog, or the croak of giant frogs magnified by still water. And yet, even the most rational minds admitted something peculiar. Many who reported the Bunyip were not hysterical, but calm, steady witnesses. They simply described what they had seen or heard without embellishment. A shape in the moonlight, a ripple where there should have been none, a cry that felt not animal, not mechanical, but mournful and ancient. Such experiences rarely survive the scrutiny of science, but they endure in memory. And memory, after all, is where myths live best. If you stand by a billabong in the early hours before dawn, you might begin to understand. The air is cool and damp. The surface of the water lies perfectly still, reflecting the stars like a mirror. Then a small sound, almost imperceptible, a single bubble rising from the deep, followed by a faint, slow ripple moving outward, as though something beneath had exhaled. The reeds sway, though no wind passes through them. Then silence again. In that moment, the modern mind might search for reason, a fish, a turtle, perhaps. But the older part of the human mind, the one that still listens to stories, feels something else, a presence, a balance, a reminder that the world, for all its maps and measures, still holds corners untouched by knowing. The Bunyip lives there, not as proof, but as poetry. A spirit of warning, of wonder, of the deep, breathing heart of Australia itself. And as the first light of dawn begins to gild the gum trees, the water settles, the land exhales, the shadow beneath the reeds disappears into the calm. Perhaps it was just a trick of the light. Or perhaps, as the elders say, the Bunyip was only making sure you remembered to tread gently and to listen when the land speaks. The morning sun begins to burn away the fog from the surface of the billabong, but the sense of mystery lingers, like breath upon a mirror. The air hums with insects, and somewhere in the distance a kookaburra laughs sharp, echoing, bright. Yet here by the water's edge, silence lingers between every sound. The land feels older than time itself. For those who have lived alongside these waters for millennia, the Bunyip has never been a tale of terror, It has been a lesson in listening. The dreaming, the great tapestry of stories and laws that connect all things, teaches that the land is alive, and that everything, stone, tree, wind and river, has a spirit. The Bunyip is one of those spirits, both fierce and protective. It teaches balance, that if people respect the places where life gathers, those places will keep them safe. But if they forget, if they take too much or tread too loudly, the water will remember. The old ones told children never to camp too close to the deep pools, not because they feared monsters, but because they understood nature's patience. The Bunyip, they said, does not punish quickly. It waits, it watches, and it acts only when balance is broken. When early European settlers recorded these stories, they often misunderstood them, imagining the Bunyip as an animal to be caught, photographed, or displayed. But for indigenous storytellers, such curiosity missed the point. The Bunyip was never meant to be seen, it was meant to be heard. Its voice, that strange, low, hollow cry, was the sound of the land itself speaking. To hear it was to be reminded that some mysteries are sacred. Even now, in remote regions of Australia, people still tell of strange cries rising from the swamps after dark. Farmers on the Murray River speak of shapes gliding across the water at dusk, or of their dogs refusing to go near certain pools. Truck drivers travelling the long, empty highways of New South Wales have reported hearing what they describe as a mournful bellow, half animal, half human, echoing across the floodplains after rain. There are even modern sightings. A camper in the late 1990s near the Barmah Forest claimed to have seen ripples spreading from the centre of a still billabong when no fish stirred and no wind blew. Others describe a single pair of eyes glinting just above the waterline, vanishing as soon as they are noticed. Such accounts rarely make headlines, but they persist. Quiet stories told between friends, carrying the same reverence that has always surrounded the legend. Scientists, of course, offer explanations. Some suggest the cries are the booming calls of bitterns, large marsh birds whose deep notes echo across wetlands and can sound uncannily like the moans described in folklore. Others point to seals that occasionally travel far inland through river systems, or even the long-forgotten bones of Ice Age animals that fuel the imagination of those who find them. Each theory answers part of the question, but not all of it, for the Bunyip has always been more than the sum of its evidence. To Aboriginal elders, the Bunyip remains a messenger, a reminder that water is life, and that life demands care. In a country where drought and flood are part of the same eternal rhythm, the Bunyip story is a prayer for balance. When water vanishes, the land remembers its thirst. When water returns, it must be honoured. To disturb that cycle is to invite imbalance, the kind of imbalance that legends are made to warn against. In this way, the Bunyip belongs to something larger than any one story. It connects to the rainbow serpent, that great ancestral being said to have shaped the rivers and valleys of the world. Where the serpent created, the Bunyip guarded. Where the serpent gave life, the Bunyip preserved it. They are two notes of the same ancient song, one of creation, one of protection, and perhaps that's why, even in modern times, the name Bunyipper carries such quiet power. It appears in local place names, in festivals, in art, in literature. Children hear it in school books. Adults see it in museum exhibits. The legend has become part of the fabric of Australian identity, a bridge between ancient dreaming and contemporary wonder. Imagine standing once more by the edge of a still billabong at dusk. The cicadas sing their endless chorus. The surface of the water glows orange from the sinking sun. Then, slowly, the light dims to blue. The air cools. The stars begin to bloom overhead, one by one. In the quiet you might hear a single sound, low, distant and resonant. It could be a bird, it could be the wind moving through reeds, or it could be something older, something that has lived here since before there were names for such things. If you listen long enough, you realize the sound is not threatening. It is steady, rhythmic, almost calming, like the earth breathing. You stand still, listening, feeling the pulse of water beneath your feet. For a moment, you understand what the elders meant, that the Bunyip is not a warning of fear, but a reminder of belonging, a voice of the land calling out softly, telling you that you are part of this place too, and that respect is the only offering it asks for. Then the sound fades. The water stills, and all that remains is the chorus of night, the distant hum of frogs, the whisper of wind through gum leaves, and the slow turning of the sky. Perhaps the Bunyip has gone back to sleep. Or perhaps it was never asleep at all, only waiting for someone to listen. From the warm breath of the Australian swamps, our journey now turns north once more, across oceans, through centuries, and into the misty forests of New England. There, beneath the pale glow of streetlights and the quiet watch of the moon, another legend took root, one smaller, stranger, and far more recent, yet wrapped in the same timeless veil of mystery. On a quiet road outside a small Massachusetts town, spring rain dripped from the trees and mist clung low to the ground. It was 1977, a year ordinary in every way, except for one strange night when something was seen that didn't fit anywhere. Small, pale, and silent, it crouched on a stone wall, its eyes glowing orange in the headlights. The teenagers who saw it would never forget. They called it the Dover Demon, a creature too new to be legend, too strange to be explained, and too haunting to fade. The town of Dover rests among the wooded hills of Massachusetts, a gentle, quiet place of winding roads, old stone fences, and the kind of stillness that gathers after dark. It is the sort of town where nothing much happens, and where the trees seem to lean inward, as though keeping secrets. But in April of 1977, for 3 nights, Dover became the centre of one of New England's most enduring mysteries. The first sighting came on the evening of April 21st. 17-year-old Bill Bartlett was driving along Farm Street with 2 friends when his headlights caught something on a low stone wall. At first he thought it was a small animal, perhaps a dog or raccoon, but as the car drew closer, his mind began to resist what his eyes were seeing. The creature was hairless, its skin pale and peach-coloured, almost the shade of wet sand. Its head was enormous compared to its thin, spindly body, and its fingers clutched the stones with an unnatural grace. Most unsettling of all were its eyes, large, glassy and orange, reflecting the headlights like embers. Bartlett slowed, staring in disbelief as the being turned its head toward him, expressionless, its movements smooth and slow, like a lizard or a spider. Then, in an instant, it scurried down the wall and disappeared into the brush. The boys drove on in silence. None of them spoke for several minutes. When they did, their voices were low, careful, as though afraid that speaking too loudly might make the memory real. Later, Bartlett would sketch what he saw. A thin creature, 4 feet tall at most, with long limbs, a featureless face, and 2 large glowing eyes. The drawing, simple and stark, became the image that would define the legend. The next night, April 22nd, another teenager named John Baxter reported seeing the same creature while walking home after midnight. The night was damp and cold, the air heavy with fog. As he walked along a wooded road, he saw a small figure ahead. Thinking it was a neighbour's child, he called out. But there was no answer. The figure moved strangely, crawling instead of walking, its limbs bending in unnatural ways. When Baxter stopped, it did too. He took a step forward, and the creature turned its head, its eyes glinting faintly in the beam of his flashlight. Baxter described feeling a wave of instinctive dread, though the being did not move toward him. Instead, it watched, silent, patient, before slipping down a gully and vanishing among the rocks near a stream. When Baxter later compared his description to Bartlett's sketch, both boys swore they had seen the same thing. A third sighting followed a few hours later, when another local, Abby Brabham, claimed to have seen the creature crouched near a bridge, its eyes glowing green this time, its skin greyish and slick, as if wet. By the end of that week, Dover was no longer quiet. Reporters came, UFO enthusiasts arrived, police took statements but found no evidence, no footprints, no hair, no damage, nothing at all. The sightings stopped as quickly as they began. 3 nights, 3 witnesses, and then silence. Yet the story refused to fade. Over the years, researchers and folklorists would return to Dover, trying to make sense of what had happened. Some said it was a misidentified animal, perhaps a young moose or foal glimpsed in poor light. Others argued it was a hoax, though no one ever confessed to inventing it. A few suggested something stranger, that the Dover demon might have been a being not of this world, a glimpse of something that slipped briefly between dimensions. But perhaps what made the story endure was not the evidence, but the tone of those who told it. Bartlett, Baxter, and Brabham were not fortune seekers. They were quiet, ordinary teenagers who gained nothing by their accounts. Decades later, Bartlett would still insist he wished he had never seen it. "It wasn't exciting," he said in an interview years later. "It was disturbing. It didn't belong." That phrase, "it didn't belong," captures something essential about the Dover demon. Unlike many cryptids rooted in centuries of folklore, this one emerged in a world already mapped and modern. There were no sacred stories or ancient traditions to explain it, only a momentary encounter with something that refused categorization. And that, in its own way, is what makes it haunting. Because the Dover demon represents not a memory of the past, but a crack in the present. A reminder that even now, even here, mystery can appear without warning. Some researchers have drawn parallels between the demon and the emerging UFO phenomena of the 1970s. The creature's large head and eyes, its small frame, even its smooth skin echo descriptions of the so-called greys from alien encounters. Perhaps, they suggested, the Dover demon was part of that same strange pattern, an overlap of folklore, fear, and the human need to explain what defies explanation. Others, more grounded, saw in it a reflection of adolescence itself, the way the world feels uncanny at that age, filled with transformation, uncertainty, and glimpses of the unknown just beyond reach. The creature, pale and fragile, might not have been real in the physical sense, but it was real in emotion, a manifestation of the unease of growing up in a world that no longer feels familiar. Yet no matter how scholars interpret it, the story of the Dover demon has become woven into the region's identity. The stone walls still stand, the roads are still narrow, curving through woods that seem to lean in close, and on foggy nights when the headlights catch the gleam of wet leaves, travellers still glance toward the edges of the trees just to be sure. If you ever find yourself on Farm Street after midnight, you might understand why. The mist settles thick, the air quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. The world feels momentarily older, as though time itself has slowed to listen. In that stillness you might imagine a figure perched on a rock wall, small, motionless, watching, the eyes not menacing, not kind, just observing. And before you can be sure what you've seen, it's gone swallowed by the night. Maybe the Dover demon was never meant to be caught or proven. Maybe it was only ever a whisper from the unknown, a brief reminder that not every mystery belongs to the past. Because even in the age of electricity and reason, the night still has its secrets, and sometimes those secrets stare back. The mist lies thick over the small town of Dover, the kind of quiet mist that makes every sound softer, every shape uncertain. A streetlight hums faintly over the bend in the road, the beam of its glow disappearing into the fog. If you stand there long enough, you can almost imagine how it must have felt that spring night in 1977. Headlights cutting through the haze, the road narrow, the air cool and wet, and somewhere at the edge of sight something that shouldn't be there at all. Even decades later, the story feels close, like something that might happen again at any moment. Dover hasn't changed much. The same stone walls run along the same twisting streets, their moss-covered edges rising out of the forest like the bones of the earth. The woods are thick and still, the kind that seem to breathe when the wind moves through them. On quiet nights when the traffic is gone and the town is asleep, the silence becomes a presence, a weight that feels aware, listening. That is where the Dover demon belongs, not in bright daylight or newspaper clippings, but in this hush, the kind of hush that makes your own thoughts louder, where the mind fills in what the eye cannot see. Locals rarely talk about it anymore. A few who remember that week in 1977 still shake their heads and smile, as if unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Most of them were children then, told by their parents not to walk alone after dark. Some remember police cars parked by the woods, their lights faint through the mist. Others remember how the grown-ups spoke softly about that thing the Bartlett boy saw. But no one ever really stopped thinking about it. Stories like that never truly fade. They settle into the soil. They become part of the landscape. There were no more official sightings after that spring, but the feeling of the story lingered, showing up in late-night whispers, in local art, in the nervous laughter of teenagers walking home from parties along Farm Street. Once, in the early 2000s, a group of hikers reported seeing something strange by the edge of the woods. Small footprints in the mud, almost human but oddly elongated, with long, narrow toes. They thought little of it until they noticed the prints simply stopped halfway across the trail, as though whatever made them had vanished into the air. No one claimed it was the Dover demon, not out loud at least, but the photos they took made their way online, and the legend flared briefly once more before fading again into the rhythm of ordinary life. That is how such stories survive, not in proof, but in persistence. They wait quietly, pass down through rumour, reappearing whenever the world feels too neat, too certain. Because even in the age of light pollution and GPS, the idea that something unknown might still move just beyond the reach of our headlights feels oddly comforting. The Dover demon, for all its strangeness, never harmed anyone. It never chased, never screamed, never struck. It simply appeared, observed and vanished. It didn't behave like a predator, nor like an alien invader. It felt almost lost, out of place. The witnesses often said that was the strangest part. It didn't seem dangerous. It seemed confused. In that way, the creature became a symbol for something deeper, the sense that the modern world has outpaced mystery, leaving no room for wonder. The demon felt like a fragment of something from another world, or perhaps from our own, a piece of ancient imagination that had somehow wandered into reality. Writers and folklorists who studied the case began to see it as part of a new kind of folklore, postmodern mythology. Unlike old legends born over centuries, the Dover demon was born in days, yet carried the same emotional weight. It had no temple, no culture of worship, no songs, only a shared unease, the quiet admission that we still don't know everything that walks beside us. And perhaps that's what keeps it alive. Because even now, on nights when fog rolls in thick over the roads, there are those who swear they've seen something move between the trees, something small, pale and quick, vanishing the moment the lights catch it. Sometimes a driver will glance up into their rearview mirror and for the briefest instant think they see two faint orange glows far behind them, too low for headlights, too round for taillights, and gone as soon as they blink. They tell themselves it's reflection, trick of mist and motion, but later, when they reach home, the image lingers, quiet, stubborn, and impossible to explain. The Dover demon never returned, at least not in any way that could be measured, but in another sense it never left. It became part of the place, part of that quiet New England strangeness that hides beneath normal life. A shape glimpsed in fog, a sound in the trees, a feeling that something is watching but without malice, only curiosity. Perhaps that is the truest form of all cryptids. Not creatures to be feared, but companions to our imagination. They follow us not through forests or swamps, but through time, reflections of the parts of ourselves that still long for the unknown. The Dover demon reminds us that wonder doesn't have to live in the distant past. It can appear on an ordinary road, in an ordinary town, under an ordinary moon, and still leave a mark deep enough to last for generations. And so the town returns to its quiet rhythm. The streetlights hum, the woods breathe, and somewhere, in the fog that drifts over the old stone walls, a shape moves softly, unseen, patient, not haunting, just existing. The headlights of another car sweep past, and for an instant the trees flash gold. But when the darkness returns, the road is empty once more. Maybe that's how the story will always end, with a glimpse, a pause and silence. Because sometimes the greatest mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be remembered. From the mist and quiet of New England, our long journey through the world's hidden creatures draws to its close. We have travelled from forests and lakes to deserts and jungles, across centuries and cultures, chasing the shapes that move just beyond the edge of sight. And now, as night deepens and your breath slows, it's time to gather what we've found. The wonder, the reflection, the peace that comes from not needing every answer. As the night draws its curtain over our long journey, the world grows still again. The forests we've wandered fade into shadow, the rivers return to silence, and the old stories settle like dust across the centuries. From the footsteps of Bigfoot to the ripples of Loch Ness, from the deserts of Puerto Rico to the frozen north, each legend we've met whispers the same quiet truth. That mystery is not something to be solved, but something to be cherished. And perhaps in the hush between heartbeats, that is where the real magic lives. We have travelled far, through rainforests and mountains, over lochs and deserts, through dreams and folklore and quiet places that still hum with imagination. Along the way, we have met creatures whose stories stretch across continents and centuries, some fierce, some kind, all timeless. And now, as our journey slows, we begin to see that these stories were never only about monsters, they were about us. Because every cryptid, every shadow glimpsed at the edge of sight reflects something deeply human. They are the mirror of our wonder, our fear, our longing to believe that the world still holds secrets. Bigfoot walks the forests because we need to believe the wild still belongs to something untamed. The Loch Ness monster ripples beneath the water because we want to think the past hasn't fully left us. The Wendigo warns us of greed. The Thunderbird reminds us of power balanced with reverence. The Chupacabra teaches us about modern myth, how fear evolves, even in the glow of electricity. Each legend is a lantern hung in the dark, guiding us toward questions we might never answer, but must never stop asking. For centuries, humans have looked into the unknown and filled it with story. We have drawn creatures into the gaps of understanding, not out of ignorance, but out of imagination. And even now, in an age of satellites and science, we still look at the wilderness and feel something stir, the same instinct that made our ancestors whisper around fires, telling tales to explain the sounds of the night. It's easy to think that mystery has vanished from the world, that everything has been found, mapped, documented, digitized. But listen closely, it's still here. It's in the rustle of the trees before dawn, in the strange patterns of waves on a still lake, in the fog that moves through small towns when the streetlights dim. Mystery doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. It hides not because it fears discovery, but because it knows that discovery alone is not enough. Wonder must remain. And maybe that's what the stories of cryptids truly offer. Not fear, not superstition, but balance. They remind us that logic and imagination can coexist, that science and story are both ways of seeking truth. One measures the world, the other gives it meaning. Together they make life richer. The people who tell these stories, the First Nations elders, the sailors, the farmers, the wanderers, the children, they all share something in common: respect. A quiet understanding that belief isn't always about proof. Sometimes it's about presence, about feeling small under the stars, and knowing that the world is still far larger than what we can hold in our hands. Imagine for a moment the creatures we've met on this long journey, not as monsters but as symbols. Bigfoot, the guardian of wilderness. Nessie, the keeper of the deep past. Mothman, the messenger of awareness. Chupacabra, the echo of modern fear. Wendigo, the shadow of greed and hunger. Thunderbird, the voice of the sky. Mokele-Mbembe, the pulse of mystery unbroken by time. Bunyip, the watcher of water, the balance between taking and giving. Dover Demon, the whisper that even the familiar can still surprise us. Together, they form a map, not of geography, but of the human spirit. Each one marks a place where curiosity and caution meet, where science reaches its edge and story takes over. As you listen now, the world around you grows softer. The roads, the rivers, the distant hills, all fade into quiet. The night holds you in its rhythm, and you begin to understand that these stories were never about chasing proof. They were lullabies for the restless parts of us, the parts that still dream when the lights go out. Perhaps in some corner of the world, a ripple still moves across a dark lake. Perhaps a set of footprints still appear in fresh snow leading nowhere. Perhaps something unseen watches kindly from the forest's edge. Or perhaps all of it. Every story, every shadow lives inside the human heart, reminding us that the unknown is what makes the world worth knowing. And that, maybe, is the oldest story of all. So tonight, as the last echoes of thunder and legend fade, take one slow breath and let your mind drift. Let the forests, the rivers, the mountains, and the creatures within them fold gently into dream. The journey is complete, but the mystery, the wonder will wait for you always. If you're still awake, thank you for travelling through time and tale with me. And if your eyes have already grown heavy, may your dreams be kind, your curiosity endless, and your heart forever open to the quiet magic of the unknown. Good night, traveller of stories. May you rest well in the company of mysteries,